I had no idea that, especially from the perspective of like complex trauma, of just like little things accumulating over time. And I think that, at least for me, I wasn't able to really truly understand that what I had experienced was trauma until I saw like on paper, like these are the symptoms. This is what you're experiencing. Even if you had told me or tried to explain what complex trauma is to me. And it's kind of the same thing of like being an adult child. Like I didn't know that my childhood had impacted me as much as it did until I saw on paper, oh shit, these are all the symptoms. Like this is everything that I'm experiencing.
Hey, what's up? This is Kristen Carter, and you are listening to the I Have ADHD podcast. I am medicated, I am caffeinated, I am regulated, and I am ready to roll. I'm here today with Andrea Ashley from the Adult Child podcast. I love this woman. We connected about a year ago. I had the privilege of being on her podcast. It was a very raw time for me, so I hope we can kind of talk about that interview and how I feel like I showed up as a weirdo, but that is totally fine. But I absolutely love the work that she is doing. Her podcast, the Adult Child podcast, features so many experts in the area of trauma, dysfunctional families, complex PTSD, et cetera, et cetera. And it's such an amazing resource for those of us who grew up in dysfunctional families. Andrea was diagnosed with ADHD, but she is questioning that diagnosis, which we're going to talk about, and just can't wait to get into all of the things with her. So Andrea, welcome. Thanks for being here.
Welcome. Do you ever say I'm caffeinated and dysregulated?
I do. I 100% do. Once in a while, it's like, y'all, I am not regulated. It's going to be a spicy ep. And those are some of the best ones. But unfortunately, today I am feeling good. I would love to hear, if you don't mind, you have such an interesting family history that I think a lot of my listeners will relate to. And so would you mind just kind of telling us your journey, like your sobriety journey, but then also how you kind of figured out that you grew up in a hella dysfunctional family and like the impact that that had on you?
So I'm somebody that always knew that my childhood was less than ideal. You know, my mom was an alcoholic, my parents fought, but I had no idea the true magnitude of the impact on me. I thought that because I could talk about it without getting upset, I thought that because I was never physically or sexually abused, I thought that because all of my needs had always been accounted for, I thought that because I became kind of the problem, the focus of the family at the age of 12, all of these things, I thought I had zero clue that what I had experienced was trauma. Like no clue at all. And it wasn't until I realized that what I was experiencing in romantic relationships was complex PTSD. And I think that there's probably so many people out there who don't realize that that is what's going on for them. So hitting my bottom, my adult child bottom. So I was, and I can get into my addiction too, but so I was 7 years sober. I dated a guy for less than a month. He ghosted me, and my reaction was as if my husband of 30 years had just like tragically died in a plane crash. I was non-functioning. I couldn't go to work. I literally felt like I was going to die. And this was not like a new feeling for me, but it was definitely heightened. So I feel like most people, when they get sober, they don't necessarily have like the best romantic picker. I mean, typically like you're not getting sober with like a long history of like healthy romantic relationships and like high self-esteem. So the issue was that I saw my friends that I get sober with, I saw their pickers improve, and my picker was not improving. And it was more so from the perspective of like how I felt. Each new relationship, I felt crazier than ever. I acted crazier than ever. My peace of mind would just be hijacked as immediately as I got into a relationship. I was not somebody that hopped from one relationship to the next. I would have a long period of time in between relationships. I felt good about myself. I liked myself. I promised myself that I wasn't going to ignore red flags. I promised myself I wasn't going to find myself in the same situation. It was like time after time after time, the same fucking thing kept happening, and I couldn't figure out what the hell was going on. And so here we are yet again, 7 years sober. And so it was in the midst of that pain that I realized that one, there was no way that the way I was feeling could actually be about this guy, because I had known him for less than a month and he clearly had a drinking problem. And the second aha was, wow, this is the exact same feeling that I felt as a little girl when I woke up in the middle of the night and felt like I was going to die if I couldn't sleep in my mom's bed. And that was like the first time that I really made the connection to this being childhood related. It was like a couple months later, probably. I'm at a 12-step meeting. I hear a woman with over 30 years sober talking about when she had 7 years sober, that she had this relationship. She had hit her like a second bottom, came to terms with the true impact that her childhood had on her. And she mentioned this book, Adult Children of Alcoholic and Dysfunctional Families. So I go home, I read the book, my mind's blown. It was like for the first time, I'm like seeing everything on paper that I had felt, thought, did. Now, mind you, so I'd gotten sober in Florida. At this point, I was living in San Francisco, but where I got sober in Florida, I felt like people with long-term sobriety, their stories were like, life sucked. I got sober and everything was great after that. Like, sure, life on life's terms still happens, but like pain of my own making, like ceased the day that I got sober. And so like there was a lot of shame there, you know, and thankfully in San Francisco, people were talking about it. Because
that wasn't your experience. Is that what you're saying? Like, you weren't having that same experience of like, life's so much better.
Well, life was, but not when the dating stuff. Yeah, like, yes, it was. Like, every other area of my life was improving. But, like, I mean, I was, this relationship stuff wasn't. And I was becoming convinced that, like, I was inherently flawed and unfixable. I couldn't figure it out. And so reading this book, you know, really was such a relief. So the next week I go back to that meeting and I see that lady and I go up to her and I'm like, thank you so much for what you shared. And she's like, that's great. I just want to let you know, though, that just reading this book, like, is not going to be enough, like, to fix this. Like, this is going to take years of therapy. You have to treat this as seriously as you treated your alcoholism. And I don't know, maybe I was like 28. And I'm like, years? Like, I don't have years, lady. Like, I need this fixed yesterday. I really just hope that her childhood was like a lot more screwed up than mine. And so I was like, I'll take a year off from dating. I've read this book. Like, surely that's good enough. Fast forward a year and a half later, like, enter a new relationship, another alcoholic, and the most like insane, painful 6 months of my whole life. Just even worse than like hitting my bottom, like from drugs and alcohol. And it was through that I really came to understand that this was trauma, like that this was complex PTSD, and really came to understand that like my life depended upon like really confronting this stuff, and that I did have to take it as seriously as my alcoholism. I always knew that like alcohol was a symptom, but it was kind of through this experience that I was finally realizing that like alcoholism was just a symptom. And so when that relationship ended, I really just embarked on this journey to like really heal from all of this stuff, but just to like give a little snapshot of what my childhood experience was like. So only child, things looked very nice and pretty from the outside. And you know what? Things were like, I would say 80% of the time, things were really great. So when I was 7, I found out my mom was an alcoholic. We were like out to dinner one night. I was with my mom. We were sitting at the table. She had ordered a beer. I remember she was barely drinking it. And then at a certain point, my dad arrived. She started to cry a little bit. She took me to the bathroom. And I remember asking her, like, what's wrong? And she said, I'm an alcoholic. And clearly, like, I don't know what that means. But somehow, like, I don't know how to explain it. It was like, I didn't know what that meant, but I did know what it meant. And I said, what does that mean? And she said, it means that I can't drink. And it was like, I went to bed that night and woke up the next morning almost like having skipped several like stages of development in a way. And I developed this sixth sense as it related to her drinking, and I would feel it hours before she would even pick up a drink. The times that she drank the most was when my dad was out of town for work, which was often. You know, she was always there to put me to bed and pick me up from swimming and feed me dinner and all that stuff, but she would do it drunk. And what would happen was whenever my dad was out of town, I would always go in the middle of the night and go, like, when I'd wake up to go to the bathroom in the middle of the night, I would go and spend the rest of the night in her bed. And it was almost kind of like a fun, like, sleepover type thing. One middle of the night, I woke up and I went in there and all the lights were on, the bed was still made, and she had passed out downstairs. And I just remember the first time that happened, just like hysterically crying, like trying to get her upstairs into bed. The thing is that my mom's drinking was a secret, like, from the rest of the world. And so my dad really used me as like his emotional support and confidant like very much emotionally parentified, like 8 years old, helping him search the house for her booze, pouring booze down the drain. And to me, all of this was like very exciting. I think that that's how I dealt with it, as opposed to being like just absolutely just terrified and sad. It was almost like I got a hit from it. Like, I really do think that like my first addiction was probably to the chaos going on in the home. And I remember just sitting on the stairs, like late at night, listening to my parents argue, just like a moth to a flame, and just needing to hear like every single word that they were saying. I think that there was an element of safety that came from being able to know exactly what was going on. But so then what happened one night is I was 9 years old. I woke up one night in the middle of the night. My dad was not out of town, and I felt like I was going to die if I couldn't sleep in my mom's bed. Now I realize that it was, some sort of an emotional flashback, but I just lost it. Like, I was inconsolable. And so finally they gave up. They let me sleep in there, but that started this pattern of every night falling asleep in my bed and then switching places with my dad in the middle of the night. And after several months of this going on, they eventually sent me to a therapist. And I remember asking years later, like, hey, like, did you ever tell the therapist that like you were an alcoholic and that you and dad fought all the time? And her answer was no, it didn't seem relevant. And so like at age 9, that's when I became the identified patient, the scapegoat of the family.
Tell me what that means when you say the identified patient, because I know that's like a term that's widely used, but I don't know if my people, like, it's not something that I knew about. So what does that mean?
I mean, it's kind of like the scapegoat, but it's like I'm the person in the family that's being labeled as the symptom bearer, right? Like, I'm exuding all of the issues of the family.
So a dysfunctional family kind of pins all of the issues onto one person, and instead of taking care of their own stuff, they label you or the identified patient as like, okay, this person really has a problem. We need to get them help. We need to get them therapy, et cetera, et cetera. Meanwhile, they're not doing anything to help themselves. They're not doing any therapy on their own. They're not taking care of their own issues.
Yeah, and I think in some families that it's interesting because it's not like clearly there were issues, right? Like clearly I was exuding problems. So it's not like just out of nowhere, they're just like throwing all this stuff on me. I mean, clearly I needed help, right? But yeah, it's a way for the rest of the family to avoid having to confront and look at their own issues. And really what that is, right? Like I've made posts about this, about how like you're not the problem child, you're the child communicating the problem. And so you really are the whistleblower. Like you really are trying to sound the alarm bells of like, hey, something's going on here. Like, please help. And I think that now I would hope that therapists would probably handle that situation differently with just what we know now, but not really at the time. So eventually, I was able to start sleeping in my own bed again. But then when I started to act out, when I started to drink and use drugs at 12, like that actually worked in fixing the family. My mom stopped drinking as much and my parents stopped fighting as much because it's like they had to come together to like really deal with me, And so then that's when from, 13 to 19 until I got sober, it was in and out of rehabs, boarding schools, all of those things. And there's a lot of other things that were happening there too, but that worked. Like they got their act together. I mean, at least while I was acting out. So it really can work, but the problem is that if that person gets better or seeks, help, the rest of the family just kind of picks up where they left off. And unfortunately, like that is the case with my family. And I mean, my mom's in like late stage alcoholism. My dad's definitely an alcoholic too. It's very toxic. It's very sad. It's so dysfunctional. And they'll try to put me in that kind of scapegoat role when they can. Yeah, I mean, I've gotten a lot more defiant. I won't really put up with it as much anymore, but it's amazing how, they'll try to do whatever they can to kind of put me in that role. And you know what? It's not conscious. I know that they're not doing it intentionally, but it's hard. It's painful.
Tell me how you did not identify as someone who had trauma, because I think this is so common. And I swear, someday I'm going to write a memoir and it's going to be called, I Don't Have Any Trauma, because as someone who is very, very highly traumatized myself, I never knew that what I had been through and was like also like currently going through up until my almost 40 years old was trauma. And I think that there is this thought process that trauma is an acute single incident that happens. It's, an SA. It is a wild car accident. It's the early death of someone in the family. Like it's a huge event. And what we now know is that trauma, it can be small things that happen to you over time where a wound happens and there's no soft place to land. There's no one caring for that wound. And so it leaves, a lasting scar. I think that we all carry trauma, especially as neurodivergent people in a neurotypical world. But for you, it seems pretty obvious now, like looking at your story.
Well, not really. I mean, I thought that trauma was like big T trauma. You know what I mean? I wasn't educated in that way. I had never heard of complex PTSD.
But the thing is, you were in therapy. You had gone to rehab. Why hadn't anyone, I'm angry on your behalf.
Here's the thing too, is that I wouldn't say the trauma didn't really surface until I was in my 20s and sober and all of that stuff came up. So I'm not really sure. Yes, there was traumatic things happening, but one, I was the focus of the family, right? Nobody was talking about this. I didn't know that. I thought that it really had to be some sort of catastrophic event or, sexual abuse or witnessing something really horrible. I had no idea that, especially from the perspective of complex trauma, just little things accumulating over time. And I think that, at least for me, I wasn't able to really truly understand that what I had experienced was trauma until I saw on paper, these are the symptoms. This is what you're experiencing. Even if you had told me or tried to explain what complex trauma is to me, and it's kind of the same thing of being an adult child. I didn't know that my childhood had impacted me as much as it did until I saw on paper, oh shit, these are all the symptoms. This is everything that I'm experiencing. I don't think I would have been able to come to terms with it unless I actually saw that what I was experiencing was PTSD.
That's such a good point. So since you bring it up, I do want to read what makes an adult child, because I went on your podcast having listened to it before, but really not knowing. And as you are reading me the symptoms, I'm getting so activated because I'm like, oh, yep. Yes. And so I just want to read it for everyone. This is from Adult Children of Alcoholics and Dysfunctional Families World Service Organization. Here are some of the questions that we use to help identify ourselves as an adult child. Ready? Here we go. Do I fear authority figures and angry people? Do I see most forms of criticism as a personal attack? Do I have difficulty identifying feelings? Do I involve myself in the problems of others? Do I feel more alive when there is a crisis? Do I judge myself without mercy and guess at what is normal? Do I recall anyone in my home drinking or taking drugs or being involved in some other behavior that I now believe could be dysfunctional? Do one of my parents make excuses for the other parent's drinking or other behaviors? As an adult, do I feel immature? Do I feel like a child inside? I could answer yes to every single one of those freaking questions. And that makes me mad. I get angry thinking about that.
Yeah, I want to circle back on the what is trauma thing as far as being kids. It's not about what happened to you. It's about what you came to believe about yourself in the world as a result of what happened to you. Mostly, it's also about who was there and who wasn't there. We all do experience trauma as kids. What can prevent it from turning into PTSD in adulthood is if you have somebody there that's able to kind of help you process and work through what happened. But that's why little t trauma, I think, is so much more damaging than experiencing one big T trauma, is because all of this is happening when you're developing your sense of self. And also too, it's you don't have the brain development or maturity to be, you're not in your head oh, well, I'm just like being emotionally neglected. Like, thank God I'm not being sexually abused like Timmy. Like, you don't have that sort of rationale. Like, you can't think that way. Like, as a kid, you're just seeing through things through your own lens. And not even really, it's not even like, I know for me, when my parents were treating me a certain way, I wasn't thinking in my head like, oh, this must mean that I'm unlovable. Like, none of that is either conscious either. Like, it's all just being insidiously like brainwashed into you, and you don't even know it's there until you just act certain ways in adulthood. You think that you like yourself, and you're like, a person who like thinks highly of themselves would not be acting this way.
That's why it's called complex trauma, because it's so insidious.
It's
so
horrible.
complex. When you look back, at least for me personally, when I look back, it's very hard for me to point to a singular event that's like, this is the thing. This is the one thing. Like, this is the reason why I've had to change family relationships. This is the reason why I've had to, work so hard in therapy. This is the reason why I have emotional flashbacks. It's like, no, there's like 400 things. It's death by 1,000 cuts. And it is this realization that emotional neglect can be so much more damaging than a big T trauma. Not that we need to do trauma Olympics and like whose trauma is worse, but when you're emotionally neglected, you don't realize that you're being neglected, just like you said. And you just start to believe like, I'm not allowed to show emotion. I'm not allowed to have emotion. Everyone else's needs are more important than mine. I'm here to be responsible for the family. And you just take on this persona, it's so unconscious. And then you're an adult who's like totally devastated by this 1-month relationship, right? I had an assistant move on to a different job, and I felt like I was being like, it was a divorce. Like she was abandoning me. Like she didn't love me or want me. And like, this is a professional relationship, Kristen, like get a hold of yourself. And I'm like bawling, feeling abandoned by someone who's just taking a different career step, which is totally fine. It's like those emotional flashbacks are so confusing when you can't pinpoint it. And I think it does take that like uncovering of like, oh.
That's the worst part about it too, is that you can know in your head that the reaction that you're having regarding your assistant is totally out of proportion and unreasonable. And you can know that in your head and you still feel like you're gonna die. It doesn't matter.
And I did. Then there's this extra layer of shame. Because you're like, what's wrong with me? Of course, she's allowed to go work for whoever she wants to work for. Like, what is my problem? Kristen, like, get a hold of yourself. And then there's the flashbacks to, you're being dramatic. You're too much. Go to your room and calm yourself down and like come back when you've got it together. Like all of those things happening as well. And it's just this huge pile of crap.
I mean, I've just come to terms with it even more just since starting, the podcast. I started the podcast in 2021, just like the body keeps the score, like all of that stuff, just the ways in which like this is embedded into our nervous system, that it's in our body. It took me a while for me to come to terms with the whole like inner child stuff. I knew that it was legit. Like I knew there was like value there, but I thought that it was corny. I've come to realize how important and necessary and valuable it is. And now what's coming to the forefront for me that is this whole parts aspect. That's like kind of what's been unfolding for me now, is just this concept of like how trauma causes us to like, ourself to kind of fragment into all these different parts and develop these coping mechanisms. And I mean, a lot of this stuff just sounded fucking crazy to me not that long. You know what I mean? Like most of this stuff, I'm like, this is so weird.
How have you found yourself healing? Like what has that looked like for you?
Hitting that bottom at 9 years and then like really starting to do this work. And a large part of that was really figuring out who I was and like what my purpose is and like stepping into like my authentic truth. And that was like really beautiful and amazing. Starting the podcast and just everything that's come from that has been really beautiful. Regarding like the inner child stuff, like I knew that there still was some shit there that like I hadn't addressed. Like it took me, probably wasn't until about 1.5 years ago that like I finally was able to start crying. Like I heard from people when they would start this work that just like the first year, crying constantly, like nonstop. And the whole time, even with my therapist, I'm like, I've been nervous. I'm like, when is this going to come up? And like, am I going to be able to handle it? And am I going to be able to get through this? And so it was like a little over a year ago, it was just one thing after another, as far as like my abandonment wound getting hit and like opened, like wide open, just all this stuff that had yet to be healed becoming very obvious. A very weird experience of being like so sane yet so insane at the same time, you know, just kind of observing myself, like watching myself engage in certain like behaviors or coping mechanisms that I know are not healthy, or understand like where it's coming from, and having this understanding of like, this is the shit that still needs to be healed, not really being able to like do anything about it almost in a way, but then also realizing that this is how it works. I think that like when we're going through stuff, we have to kind of sit in like the pain of like the awareness almost, like before we're able to start like doing things differently. And for me, what's really been coming up, and it's still all tied to my parents, it's really this belief of like, I can't take care of myself. I have this deep fear of abandonment, or this deep fear of like, I have to, the little girl in me thinks like, I'm not going to be happy. I can't have a happy or successful life unless I end up in a relationship. Me realizing how much of that is actually just rooted in the belief that like, I can't take care of myself. Like, is it really that like I need someone, or is it's really more so like I need someone to take care of me? And just untangling all of that stuff, and how much of it is mine, and how much of it is taking stuff on from my parents, and how much of it is stuff that's come from other generations. And it's been very interesting because of the experience that I've had, to where it's so crystal clear that like, this is all part of the universe's plan, and just how like synchronistic everything has been. It's easier for me to like trust that everything is happening like exactly the way it's supposed to. Like, I don't feel that way all the time, but there is more of a part of me that believes like, okay, like this is all going to be worth it at some point, or this is all going to be able to make sense. This is all part of the plan. I don't know. It's just the stuff is nuts. It's just, I just think that whether it's your higher power or the universe or your higher self, like you'll continually be put in these situations in order to like work your shit out. And before it was like, why does this keep happening to me? Why is this happening to me? When it's really like, I know exactly why this is happening to me. It's really mind blowing. You know?
I agree. It's like an invitation. It's like this constant invitation that's put in front of us. Like, would you like to work on it now? Would you like to work on it now? Would you like to work on it now? And when you finally are able, whether it's like financially, emotionally, mentally, spiritually, like you're finally able to say like, okay, yes, I'll work on it now. Then you start identifying, instead of why does this keep happening to me? You're like, oh, of course, this is how I'm going to feel. Of course, I'm going to feel abandoned. So the other day I had my abandonment wound triggered in a situation, and I was just like, yeah, of course. Like, it felt horrible. I did freak out. I got really dysregulated. But then it was, instead of like, why does this keep happening to me? It's like, of course, this is how I'm feeling. And how am I going to take care of myself? And how am I going to support myself? And how am I going to make sure that like I can get back to equilibrium so that I can like have the rest of my day, instead of having to go like lay on the floor and just like whatever. I just think that it's like this invitation. Like, when we keep having these same things happening to us, it's this invitation of like, would you like to work on this yet? And sometimes we say no, and that's okay. But it will keep happening.
Yeah, and there's a part of me that has felt like also kind of like angry at my higher power too, in the sense that like, and I don't know, all this stuff might just sound crazy to whoever's listening, but like, I don't know, it's very obvious to me that like I was chosen to like be a voice for this cause. And there's a part of me that like does sometimes like get like angry. You know, I just see how all of my experiences like end up, you know, being opportunities for me to be like a voice of healing for other people who are going through certain things. but it's like, can you just throw me a fucking bone here? Like, I'm helping all these fucking people out. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it's really frustrating sometimes.
Yes. Yeah, it is. I don't want to trivialize it, so please don't feel like that's what I'm doing, but it's like that hero's journey. Like, you watch the movie and you're just like, this poor main character, like they're getting slammed from all angles, and then the relating to that of like, oh, that's you.
Yeah.
That's so hard.
It's hard.
You said earlier that you are stepping into your authentic truth.
No, I have been. I mean, no, I would say I have been. I would say when I started doing this work, I did.
What is it? What do you feel like are the main aspects of your authentic truth?
The fact that I'm so authentic.
What does that mean for you?
Well, and this is why I am supposed to do this job. There is like kind of like this radical level of like self-acceptance for myself. Mostly there's just this vulnerability about me, and it's not even really about me choosing to show up as my authentic self. It's like, I don't know how to be any other way. You know, like, so that's kind of part of it. I think that a large part of my purpose is just letting people know that it's okay to just like fully own your entire story. Another thing that I think is unique about me and a large part of my purpose is to help other people like be able to laugh at themselves, just to be able to kind of like find the humor in, I don't know if I want to say in our flaws, but kind of like in our pain.
Yeah. Or just humanity, like in our humanity.
Yes. So it's very interesting because, yeah, I will open up about all the stuff that probably a lot of people think is cringy or embarrassing or whatever. I don't feel that way, but here we can go there. I'll tell you where I do feel that way is like this shit with my phone. Like, I don't want to fucking talk about this. I feel such shame and embarrassment about that shit. I don't want to talk about it at all.
So tell me about it.
I have a serious phone addiction, and it's fucking Candy Crush. It's interesting, like when I say things like, oh, I'm crazy, or I don't mean like I'm crazy, and I don't take it that way, but I'm having somebody pointed out to me recently, like, well, do you think that maybe there are parts of you that like maybe don't like that you're saying that? Like, I don't feel that way, but there might be some truth there if I keep saying that. But it's really been, and as I said, like this past year has been hard. So I think that my phone in certain respects has like saved my life in certain ways. But it's been really hard for me to really grasp this as an addiction, because yes, I understand that there is, you know, like the dopamine hits, like, yes, I understand that that's going on in the brain, but like as somebody who is, you know, a recovering alcoholic, as somebody who is, I don't know if like love addiction is the right word, but as somebody who's had like relationship addiction type issues, there's not the sense of like euphoria. Like there's not the euphoric hit that I get from like the phone that I do from other things, right? But like it is absolutely a problem. It is, I think that the impact, the changes that have occurred in my brain, like I really don't think that this is like that I've had ADHD. Like I really do think that this is my phone has fucked my brain. I've been reading this book. I don't know where it is. Oh, here it is. Smartphone, dumb phone. But just like reading about attention span, like none of this stuff started to happen until my phone addiction stuff like really started to like ratchet up. I never had issues with attention. I never had any of these issues until the phone stuff started to happen.
Can I ask you a very personal question?
Absolutely.
When you were diagnosed, did your clinician ask you questions about your childhood and like notice markers for ADHD in childhood? Because that's a really important aspect of receiving a diagnosis in adulthood is symptoms before the age of 12.
I don't remember. I don't really feel like there were symptoms like when I was a kid. I really don't. I mean, granted, I understand that like using drugs and alcohol can be, you know, a sign of something, but like, no. And even like in college, never had issues studying, never had issues with time management, any of that stuff. It is all just been through the phone. And I mean, really can change your brain. But when I had my assessment, she gave me a moderate diagnosis of ADHD. What she was basing that off of was there were certain, whatever they are, like parts of the assessment that where I was like scoring as like moderate or like average or whatever. And she was saying that she's comparing that to everything else where I was like exceeding. And so that's why she felt like that there was, because there was like these certain areas where I'm just like kind of at like average. And then but everything else was showing like, you know, exceeding average or whatever. But
it's like the gap between what you're doing really well and what you're performing well at, and then like the lower levels. So sometimes they look at the discrepancy between the two. Just so you know, myself and no one listening to this podcast has any room to judge anybody. And we know that, like, we've been through it. My people and we've been through it. Whether it's addiction, whether it's shame, like all of the things, there's nothing that you could ever say that would shock me. So Candy Crush addiction, I don't even care.
Yeah, God, it's really frustrating.
Yeah, I bet. It's interesting to me that it almost doesn't seem like a legitimate addiction in your mind. I bet that's a part of it. Like, that's a thing. Because to me, it seems legitimate. Like, that's intense. That's a real deal.
Yeah. I mean, like I said, I think it's very hard for me because there's not the like euphoric aspect of it that really makes it difficult for me to see it as such. But like, it absolutely is, you know? And I think too, like, I think COVID probably didn't help, just kind of being more isolated. But this is something that's been a problem like for a while. And I guess that there's a part of me that's like, wow, look at all this success that you've had in spite of having like a horrible phone addiction the whole time.
Tell me about the work that you do inside of your program. So you have your podcast, which is excellent. I highly recommend it. And then you have your
community.
So
it's called The Shit Show.
Why is it called The Shit Show, Andrea? Like, I love it.
Because I think early on, I think in my very first episode, I referred to myself as a shit show, and then just kind of took off and became a thing. So there is the 12-step community, adult children of alcoholic and dysfunctional families. And so this is not like, we're not affiliated with that or anything. What I found was that it was hard for me to find quality meetings. I felt like there was a lot of like, I don't know, like in AA, there's a lot more of an ability to find like humor in our stories and in our pain. And I found that a lot of adult child meetings were kind of doom and gloomy and almost like kind of victim-y in a way. But so we have 4 groups a week or more than that, but similar to like a 12-step meeting, but less structure, a little bit looser, a little bit more of a personality. But what I think is really cool is, so like within the app, there's all these various like subgroups within it. So there's all these different like discussion boards on particular topics that people might be dealing with, whether there's a group that's for those who are childhood sexual abuse survivors. There's one that's for shit show parenting, so people that are parenting with complex PTSD. There's one for people that are healing from narcissistic abuse. There's a neurodivergent group. There is a dual diagnosis, so those suffering from like bipolar or other issues like that. There's the shit show dudes group. So I think that that's really what's valuable, is all these kind of more unique or individualized issues that people might be dealing with. But it's really just amazing because it's people really just feel comfortable showing up as themselves. There's no shame or blame. And just the connections that people have been able to make it's really cool.
There's so much evidence for healing happening in community. And it's so encouraging and like offers me so much hope to see these communities popping up where people can experience healing, because we need it. Like, as a society, we are a mess. And the amount of people that I speak to on a daily basis who are dealing with so much, it's out of this world. So I just am so glad that that's just another wonderful, beautiful place for people to go, to be themselves, to find healing in community.
Well, what I like to say is like, all of this is like relational trauma, right? So we have to heal this stuff like in safe relationships. And so this is like a place where you can do so. And that is, you're not going to heal like this stuff fully unless there is a community aspect of it. There's only so much that you can do on your own. I think too, there's only so much you can do. There's only so much self-awareness too that you can have on your own. I think that you need to be in community with other people and hear them talking about their stuff that's coming up in order for you also to be able to have a clear picture as far as what's going on with you, you know? So tell me about what have you had any more insights or ahas?
Yes. I mean, it's been so interesting because we had a conversation in, I believe it was March or April of last year. And I was just coming out of a very intense period with my family of origin and having made some like really intense decisions. And when we spoke, I felt like I was like a deer in headlights, really not being able to speak authentically because I was so really just traumatized by the experience. And in the last year, and I guess almost a year and a half, being able to grieve and lay in bed and cry and heal. And I had done most of that before. I had done a lot of that, like leading up to it, but the freedom and the release and the relief that I have been able to experience in the last year and a half has been incredible. And my biggest ahas, I would say, are just the profound impact that my childhood has had on me. And I hate that. I don't know why. It's such like a tender and vulnerable thing. And for me, like my coping mechanisms were always to close up and to detach and to dissociate. And so my work in the last 5 years has been to connect and to reattach, to notice when I'm dissociating, to bring myself back, to not let myself escape into just like the disconnection. And that work is not fun. I don't like it. Like I would almost go so far to say like, I wouldn't recommend it. It's just so not fun, you know? But what it's allowed me to do is connect myself for the first time ever, to the point where now at 43, I feel grounded. I feel solid in who I am for the first time ever. And I think I always presented as a confident person, but I know that that was a coping mechanism and built on like a very wobbly platform of dissociation and detachment. So I always had a big personality. I was just that girl that just didn't care, except deep down, I always cared. I cared so much. And I was obsessive about caring about what people thought, about my performance, about the people in my life, and like feeling responsible to care for their emotions. And like now to be able to own that I really do care so much. And I'm also very grounded in who I am. That feels just so rooted. Like I can't describe enough, like just like having deep roots and not feeling like I'm being blown by every little thing that comes my way. And I have 3 kids, like I'm parenting a 16-year-old. And it's so triggering because when I was 16, oh my gosh, it was a very difficult season. I have a 16, a 14, and a 10-year-old. And just parenting them at their different ages has been the most triggering thing for me ever. Most triggering because I'm teleported back to how I was parented in those moments. Yeah. So that's just me going on and on. But yes, all the ahas.
It's so interesting just how much people's shit comes up through parenting. I'm curious I wonder if at all, because so much of your identity has been like tied to like having ADHD. Like, I wonder if there was any of that too. Like, fuck, like I don't want to have like this like dysfunctional family aspect like thrown in there as well. I wonder if any of that was going on.
Even though my work is built off of having ADHD, yeah, like I do in that, like I know it affects every aspect of my life, but it's not something I think about all day, every day. It's not something that I present to people. It's not something I talk about much. I'm here to like help people with ADHD. But when I was uncovering complex trauma, that thought of like, is it complex trauma? Is it ADHD? Like I wrestled with that for a long time. And my answer is just yes, it's both. Like there's no way to untangle it. I want to let everyone know as a resource, Patrick Tian has this toxic family test. I'll link it in the show notes. It's so interesting because I have 2 sisters and I send it to my sisters and I was like, let's take this separately and like see what we get. And we all scored in the 90s. There's something about feeling like maybe I'm making all of this up. Maybe it's me. Like there was this self-gaslighting that took place for several years of like, I'm probably the problem and maybe I'm making everything up and maybe it wasn't as bad as I thought it was, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But when you hand this test to like your siblings and say like, let's not talk about it, but let's take the test and then share the results. And we all score in the 90s, which was like 90s out of 100. That actually is something that I go back to over and over because it's like, I am not making this up. And that's been really helpful. That's been really, really helpful. Did you take that test? Have you taken it?
No, I haven't. I'll have to look at it. I mean, it's not like I have some sort of question about that part, but it's
that's the thing is that you had the quote unquote privilege of knowing that your family was toxic. And I found that out in my 30s. So I was like, wait, excuse me, what?
No, but I'd be very interested to see. It's also what's fucked up too, hard for me is that like my family's like a lot more toxic now than it was when I was a kid too. So that's interesting.
We have so much more that we could talk about. But what I really want you to do is tell people where to find you and how they can maybe get connected to the Shit Show community.
Yeah. So Adult Child anywhere and everywhere. Adult Child Pod on social media, but you can find the podcast Adult Child on anywhere you find podcasts. On Saturdays, that is where I either do, that's Shit Show Saturdays. So I either interview a member of my community or I'll share a like a recent recording from one of our support groups. So I don't record them all. I just sometimes record them if I'm going to use them. I get people's permission if I'm going to like use their shares, folks. And or I'll sometimes do episodes on kind of those specific issues that I was talking about before. So sometimes I'll have a couple of moms on to talk about like what it's like to parent with complex PTSD. Or I recently just had some people on talking about their use of using psychedelics as part of the healing process. So I think that that's just a good way to get a snapshot or an inside look into the type of community that it is. And as I like to say, like I am an acquired taste. I'm not for everyone. We like to joke around and have fun. It's probably not the right place for somebody who's hypersensitive and that's just not a diss on anyone, but you know what I mean? Like, it's just, I'm not for everyone, folks.
We'll link all of that in the show notes. And I feel like you and I could just talk for hours about all of this, but I just really want to recommend your podcast, especially obviously, like I have listened to so many episodes and the guests that you interview are just like top notch. So anyone who is relating to this complex PTSD convo, head over there to Adult Child and Andrea.
Yeah, and go read the laundry list, folks.
Yep, I will pop that into the show notes as well. That's from the same website that I was reading the Am I an Adult Child question. So we'll have that for you in the show notes as well, my friends. Cool. Lady, I like you a lot. I think you're great.
Back at ya.